Welcome to Wednesday of CE Week 2014. I'm so glad to see you all here. I'm Andrea Smith. I'm your conference chair. So I want to get this underway right away because I am so excited about our special guest today. Wait until you see this. I would like to introduce Intel's futurist, Brian David Johnson, and his 21st century pal, Jimmy, the 3D printed robot. So let's give him a great welcome.
Hey, everybody. So today I want to talk to you about reimagining sort of the future of technology. And that's really my job. So at Intel, I'm a futurist. And so it's my job to look 10 to 15 years in the future and imagine what it will feel like to be a human. Basically what I do is I look 10 to 15 years out and say, this is what it'll feel like to be a human and act and interact with technology. And the reason why I do that, because at Intel, it takes us about 5 to 10 years to design, develop, and deploy the chip. So it's of vital business importance today for Intel to know what people want to do 10 years from now. And that's really what I do. I'm a principal engineer at the company. I essentially write a spec. I write a specification that I then give to my colleagues so that we can start building the future today. Now, about 10 years ago, I started on this personal project thinking about robots. I'm a huge nerd, I'm a huge geek. I actually know quite a few of you. You know I'm like a super nerd, and I'm unabashed about my love for science and science fiction. And so I started thinking about the future of robotics, but not thinking about it in a science fiction way, but thinking about what would it actually be like? Like, what would it be like to live with robots? If you had robots in your house, and you're walking down the street and there's robots, and you go into a coffee shop and there's a robot, what would that actually be like? And so I worked with roboticists all over the world, actually used science fiction to imagine what it actually might be like. Because I started also doing a thought experiment. And the thought experiment went kind of like this. If you think about the history of robots, if you think back in the 70s and the 80s, we had kind of big purpose-built robots, sort of robots that, took up, they were like Asimo, and we had big AI, sort of, kind of what you would see in the movies. And for me, that was the moral equivalent of like a server, right? Really expensive. It could only really be afforded by sort of large corporations or universities, and you had to have a PhD to be able to program the robot. And then as we move forward in time, you had Rodney Brooks. So Rod is a friend of mine, and Rod came out with this idea called new AI. We didn't have to have big AI. We could actually have little small AIs, and we could do stuff with them. And so Rod famously brought out the Roomba. And the Roomba was really the first robot that people really started bringing into their homes, and it really shifted it. I mean, the work that iRobot has done has really brought the age of personal robotics into people's homes. Now there's more robots in people's homes than there are in factories. So for me, though, the Roomba was kind of the equivalent in my world of like a laptop. Right? It was kind of expensive, and it kind of just did work around your house. And so the challenge I gave myself was to say, well, what would it be like if you had, what would the equivalent of a smartphone robot be like? Not a robot that had a smartphone in it, but actually a robot that was like a smartphone, one that was social, right? One that wasn't built to go fold your laundry or work in a factory. It was actually there to be social and to kind of act and interact with you. And so we started doing this work with these roboticists, kind of thinking about where things might go. And we wrote a lot of science fiction stories, started coming up with the system architectures and stuff like that. And then there was a big change. And the change happened about 2 years ago. And we realized that with 3D printing, with open source hardware design and open source software design, and a whole army of makers and builders and students, that we could actually now start bringing these robots to life. That we could actually start thinking, how could we make a robot that was about the cost of a laptop or even the cost of a smartphone? Because that's one of the things that was a big barrier. How do we kind of get those into our lives? And so we partnered up with a bunch of different companies. We started working with Make, the people who put on Maker Faire, and we started saying, let's start working together to build the future of these robots. And we announced it last year at the World Maker Faire here in New York. And we had this huge amount of interest. We had all of these kids come. And if you've ever been to a Maker Faire, if you've never been to one, I really suggest you go because it's really a unique experience. It's not like CES or some of the other things that we all know and love. But At the Maker Faire, it's actually about you talk to people. You realize that you're actually sitting down and you have all these people come up and talk to you about 3D printing and about robotics and about where things are going. And for me, you could have a conversation with, say, a roboticist from MIT, and then the next conversation you have is like with an 8-year-old about robots. And I'll tell you, like, the 8-year-old is much harder. Like, I had an 8-year-old, like, call me out. He's like, you're bringing about the end of the human race. And I said, does your mom know you're here? And so we had this thing, and I actually realized that the people that we really needed to go talk to were the kids. And so we started saying with this 21st Century Robot project that robots are imagined first. We actually wrote up a manifesto, and we said a robot is imagined first because everything that humans have ever built that's really awesome had to be imagined first. So we said a robot is imagined first, and then second we said that a robot should be easy to build. Again, everybody should be able to build a robot. Everybody should be able to program it. They should be iterative, but they should be social. So I kind of hit the road as we were kind of building in the background. We started building the platform in the background. I hit the road and I started talking to people. I said, what would your robot do? That was my question. That would be my question to you, is if you had your own personal robot, what would your robot do that nobody else's would do? Also, what would your robot's name be? Because I said one of our mottos is every robot has a name, because every robot's built by an individual. So everybody's robot should be an individual. So what would your robot's name be, and what would your robot do that nobody else's would do? And so I started traveling around and talking to a group, lots of groups of kids, like from about 6 years old to 10 years old. And I learned these amazing, amazing things. So the first thing I learned, if there's anybody who's interested, I know we've got some robotics panels and 3D panels and some pretty cool stuff coming later in the week. Anybody who wants to build a robot, I am here today to tell you the 2 things that will make your business and your robot a success. Is anybody interested in robots? Anybody like robots? Excellent. All right, very good. Okay, so get ready, get ready, tweet it, write it down. I'm going to tell it to you. Okay, here we go. This guy's writing it down. Okay, here's the 2 things. Now, this is scientific research that I have done traveling America, talking to 10-year-olds about what a robot has to do. So your robot has to have 2 things. Your robot needs to have, number 1, a cape. For any robot to be successful, it must have a cape. The second thing, get ready. Here's what your robot must do. Your robot must be able to fart. Scientific, absolutely scientific. But this was the thing that I loved, is when I would go and talk to these kids, robots weren't this serious thing that was happening, that corporations were doing, and here I was coming from the Intel Corporation. And that's actually what kids were interested in. And as I started talking to them, you could see their imaginations took off. Like when they were telling me that their robot should fart, and I actually thought it was funny, they would actually kind of start to giggle, and I say, well, really, what would your robot do? And all kidding aside, they started coming up with really amazing things. Like we had one young lady say she wanted her robot to sing with her. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And another person said, I want my robot to dance with me. Things that we could build, right? Things that we could actually do right now. And then one that actually just melted my heart, there was a young lady who lived in a trilingual community and went to a trilingual school. And she says, I want my robot to follow me around and be a translator. Because that way, everybody could understand everybody else, and my robot could help me with that. And that's the thing we wanted to tap into. We wanted robots to be as individual as possible. And so we started working with, certainly with Intel and with Trosson Robotics, a robotics kit company, to bring about this robot. And there'll be a book coming out later this year called 21st Century Robot that I wrote that has the science fiction stories about the robots, but then also has the kind of how-to chapters that kind of teaches you how to do it. And so what we needed to do was actually come up with this robotics platform. So what I'd really like to do is I'd like to introduce you to somebody right now. Joe. So everybody, this is Joe Zawodzki. This is, so Joe is part of the robot entourage. So I wanted to introduce you to our robot.
I'm Jimmy the Robot. I'm a 2-foot-tall, high-end humanoid research robot. I was made in just 2 weeks using open source software and applications, as well as a 3D printer.
So Jimmy's designed so that you can 3D print his outside, and it's open source, so anybody can have their robot look like however they want it to look.
Wow.
So kids,
There are a lot of people here.
he also kind of does funny little things because he's a funny little robot that says really funny little stuff, and that's the idea, right? Is that he should do stuff that's fun. And
I'm not the best dancer, but maybe someone can teach me some new moves.
now I do have to say, as we've been introducing Jimmy to people, Jimmy was taught to dance by two nerds. So Jimmy can't dance. So hopefully he'll be able to have some other people sort of design some apps so he can dance. So the idea with Jimmy is that you can change how he looks on the outside, and then you can actually download apps. So think of him like a smartphone with legs. Think of him like you can go to the app store, and if you want your robot to be funny, if you want to teach him how to dance, you can download the app.
These are not the droids you're looking for.
Great. Yeah, by the way, that's our geek test as well. All of you who laughed, geeks. So, the idea with Jimmy was that you're able to go to the App Store and you can download apps to personalize him. So you can not only personalize how he looks, but you can personalize what he does. You can personalize his software. So much like your smartphone, it can evolve with you, right? So it's not just one robot, right? It is multiple robots. It can do whatever you want it to do. So just like your smartphone, maybe you loved your smartphone because you could play Angry Birds, then you got tired of Angry Birds, and so then you downloaded Candy Crush. And that's the idea with Jimmy, is he can evolve and change with people over time. So we created Jimmy with Trosson Robotics. This actually is run by an Intel Core i5 processor. So he's pretty much a desktop with legs. He's a development kind of research platform. And you can actually buy him right now. You can go to 21stcenturyrobot.com. You can actually go to the website, and you can buy this from Trosson Robotics. And it's about $16,000. Now that, it's a bit steep, but it actually turns out he's one of the fastest robots of his size. Computationally, he's really fast because he's a desktop, but also he's actually very, very fast because of his servos and things like that. We didn't have time to run him around for you today, but he's actually really fast. But what I also wanted to take the advantage of talking to you today was I wanted to introduce you to somebody else. So Joe, can we bring out our next little friend? So this is the next generation of Jimmy. So this has Intel Edison inside of it. It's the same robot. You can 3D print the shell. It has open source hardware and software inside of it. But because of the computation, because of Edison, whereas this one was $16,000, this one is $1,600. So we had a 10x cost reduction in literally a couple of months. And that's the idea. That's really the goal of the 21st Century Robot Project, is to get this little guy out there and into the hands of makers, into the hands of developers, so that they can start thinking about what would they want their robot to do. And so we're going to open it up for questions here in just a second. I'm going to put him down. I've been carrying this robot around New York City. You have never seen New Yorkers lose it. You wouldn't think, I lived in New York, right? I actually love New York City. They all turn into kids. Try getting onto an elevator with this robot. It's like selfies galore. It's amazing because everybody loves a cute little robot. I'm going to put him down. So the idea behind the 21st Century Robot Project is quite lofty. When I was talking with the folks at Make, and we were talking about the book that'll be coming out in September, they said, what's the dedication? And so I started thinking about sort of what drove this project. So the work that we're doing with makers and hackers and students and all this work that we've been doing in this sort of mission that I've been on for 10 years. So why are we doing it, actually? And then I hit upon what the dedication should be. And so the book and the project are dedicated to anybody born after the year 2014. And the reason why is that we now live in a time where we have an entire generation of young minds who have never known a time when there wasn't an internet. Right? We have a whole generation of kids who have never known a time when you couldn't walk up to a screen, ask that screen for something, and get it back in under a second. It is amazing. It is amazing. What these young minds come up with is unencumbered by the past. Right? I remember a time before the internet. as many of you might remember that time as well. It was cold and dark and boring, and there was nothing to do. It was terrible. These kids don't have that baggage, right? These kids don't have the baggage of 3 channels. This is CE week. So I said, okay, if we look at the year 2014, and if the 21st Century Robot Project is successful, then anybody born after the year 2014 will be the first generation who has never known a time when you couldn't imagine, design, build, and program your own robot. So imagine when these little guys can look how you want them to look, right? This is Jimmy, this is my robot, right? Other people can name their robots and make their robots look like they want to look. But imagine when these robots are as common as a smartphone. Imagine it if they're as assumed as the internet, right? We have this generation who has never known a time when there wasn't the internet. When they go up to a screen and that screen isn't connected to the internet, that screen is broken. Like, you have never seen a child drop a tablet quicker if you can't get on the internet. This thing is useless to them. And on top of that, you could even imagine, if you see what kids are doing when they go to like coffee shops or different places, if there's no Wi-Fi at the Starbucks is broken. Like, why would you go there? You can't get the internet. Imagine if you go to a home, imagine if you go to a Starbucks and it's broken because there's no robot. What does that future look like? And the thing is, we don't know. And that's what excites me about it. So what excites me about the 21st Century Robot Project is I don't actually know what's going to happen because it's actually up to everybody else. I don't know what a 21st century robot would do. I know what Jimmy's going to do, but I don't know what your robot would do. And that's what I'm excited to find out. And I'm really excited to find out what those young minds do. After they give their robot a cape and they give the robot that other capability, then I'm really excited to see what they build, because those are the people who are really going to reimagine the future of computing and reimagine our future in amazing ways. So thank you very much. And we've got a little bit of time for questions. So you can ask me anything. That's kind of one of the things I love to do with people. I'm a futurist, and you can ask me anything. This young lady right here. Wait, we're going to get you a mic so that you can be heard. No, come on.
Is Jimmy weatherproof?
So the question is Jimmy weatherproof? The answer is not yet. One of the things that we've had, and this is one of the beautiful things that's happened, is I took this to one of my colleagues, and I showed him this. By the way, when we brought this to Intel for the first time, I mean, you want to see like Nerd Central, you saw like engineers in their 50s go crazy. They're like, oh my gosh! We have one of our engineers wants to take Jimmy to Burning Man. So if anybody knows Burning Man, okay, well, there's that part of Burning Man. But the other part of Burning Man, it takes place in the playa, and it's got a really thin mica dust out there, which is awful for electronics. So for me, it's kind of become like a challenge. It's like, take Jimmy to Burning Man. And don't break him, but take him to Burning Man. And so I'm looking forward to, because he's so open source, we give away the mechatronic designs, we give away all the designs. People can actually alter it. So I'm hoping that we put it out there. If somebody takes him to Burning Man, he'll be very weatherproof. So another hand back here. Oh, there, and then we've got a whole mess of people over here.
Hi. So which of the companies would you say are going to drive this type of innovation in robotics? Is it Google in your view? Is it Apple? Which of the players do you see as the leader in this space?
I think it comes from 2 angles. Is that one, you have the traditional robotics manufacturers, and I think we're really poised for a dramatic shift. And these are people like who build the servos, who are like serious robotics folks. I mean, aside from the fact of the chips that are in these robots could not have existed 2 years ago. Literally could not have existed years ago. And especially this Jimmy, because of Intel Edison and because of the servos that are in him, could never have happened. I mean, $1,600 for a robot is insane. That you've got this incredible amount of innovation that's coming. So the servo technology, the connectivity technology, that is getting better and better and better. And there's a lot of sort of like unnamed companies that none of us know, who we should get to know, who are doing great stuff, because they're not only going to bring robots into our home, but into our businesses and things like that, and really transform it. And then on the other side, you have folks like Google, folks like Apple, folks like Intel, who are coming and bringing a really different mindset. Because you can imagine when I rocked into all these roboticists and said, I'm going to make a robot that's social. That's all it does, is it's social. They thought I was crazy. I mean, most robots are supposed to be able to manipulate the world around them. Most robots do the 3Ds, things that are dirty, dangerous, and dull. They do things that humans don't want to do. And I said, nope, these robots won't do that at all. Literally, by design, the hands don't work. And that just, they're like, what do you mean the hands don't work? And literally, when I've given this to some graduate students, they've actually gone back and tinkered and made the hands work. And because they can't wrap their head around it, but that was the idea. And I think for me, it's the convergence of those two worlds. And I think you see it happening, especially with what Google's doing. You see with Amazon announcing the drones. I mean, even with Amazon's in their back office, what they're doing with warehousing and sort of autonomy is absolutely amazing. So I think for me, it's the confluence of those two worlds. But the thing I want to make sure that we never forget is the people who really bring about real change and real innovation are also those entrepreneurs, and they're those students, and they're those crazy kids in their dorm rooms who come up with an idea and it's stupid and it's dumb and this is why I also like using the fart example, is that that's dumb. Why would you ever do that? And then all of a sudden these kids make Facebook, right? All of a sudden these kids make Instagram. All of a sudden these kids make Snapchat, right? Snapchat. I'm going to take a picture, and the reason why you want to use it is because it goes away. Do you realize, like, Kodak? We all remember Kodak? Like, the idea of, what do you mean? You take a picture and it disintegrates? Like, that's insane. But it's that type of innovation that I think we have to make sure, and I hold my colleagues to say, let's make sure we're tapping into them, because that's where we're going to get the new Facebook and the Twitter and the Instagram for robots.
Hi, thanks. So I'm a Jimmy fan, thank you. Woo. Go Jimmy. You talked a lot about kids. Some of the applications for robots, particularly for social, would be for very old people who want to age at home and not go into that awful long-term care scenario we know about. And Intel thinks a lot about that, I know. How are you thinking about Jimmy for people over 65, 75? Are you?
That's a great question. Yeah, we definitely are. I also should mention, being a Jimmy fan, Jimmy has a Twitter feed. He's 21C Robot. He has more followers than most people at Intel. And also, it was a very strange day when my mother started following my robot on Twitter. That was just an odd, odd day. So it was a great question. That is one of the things that we're looking for when people say, well, what can Jimmy do? And I say, oh, we don't know, we need to go talk to people. A group of people that we've been doing work with throughout the whole project is the Robotics and Interaction Lab at USC. So at USC, they have a robotics lab that looks primarily at children with autism, the elderly trying to age in place, and also rehab. And that's all they care about. Like, when I come to them, so they are looking at him and these robots as a platform specifically for that, because if any of you have worked with children with autism, this face and this type of interaction with kids with autism really, really helps in their development. One of the things that we've kind of noted on the aging in place side is that Jimmy could start to become a medication reminder. We've talked with different pharma companies who said the biggest problem is just getting people to take their medication on time and making sure that it's taken on time. And I said, well, here's an idea. So grandma's not taking her heart medication on time. Let's get the granddaughter, let's get Susie to draw a robot and then sit down with mom and dad and actually design the robot to look like her drawing, like the drawing that grandma would put up on the refrigerator. But let's actually make it a robot and print it out and then actually put it on this so that it's walking around and it looks like the picture that the granddaughter has drawn. And then we put an app on the robot so that at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., the robot walks up to grandma and says, Grandma, it's time to take your heart medication. And when we were talking to the pharma folks, they're like, oh, that's great. When can we buy it? And I say, September. But that's the idea. So yeah, it's been baked into it because we are at Intel, and all the groups that we've been working with have a deep commitment to not only make fun robots and do things like that, but actually really make people's lives better. We have a hand right here.
Hi there. So with it being a social robot and downloading the apps and reprogramming constantly, will it have a cohesive personality overall? Or is it going to be reprogrammed every time you put in a new app?
So did everybody hear that? So the idea is that it's a social robot. So is it going to be sort of have a cohesive sort of personality as sort of your robot, or is it going to be sort of changed every time you put in an app? It's a great question. So I'm going to get all nerdy on you for a minute. So let's say this is the software stack. you've got the operating system down here. It actually runs on 2 operating systems. It runs on the robot operating system, ROS. It also runs on the Darwin OP. These are open source. You can get them for free. You can download them. Up here, there's the middleware layer. That's actually what we're building. We're building a middleware layer that has APIs that allows app developers to go and write an app to not only call to the robot, but also call to make the robot kind of walk around. But one of the things that we're building into the middleware is a personality. So actually being able to say, is your robot scared? Is your robot a little aggressive? Is your robot funny? Is it goofy? That actually being able to build that in so that when you put in an app, let's say you have a little bashful robot and it's an alarm clock app. Well, how that robot sort of wakes you up is going to be very different than if you've got like an aggressive like sports robot. And we've actually built it that way, literally working with the folks at USC and to actually just make sliders in the beginning to say what should your robot be like. And that's one of the things as we have done the open source design that most of the people are just going to do apps, but we are working with a set of developers to really kind of make that so that you can author your robot and actually make him or her or it as personal as you want, and then you can play around with that personality. Oh, there's a gentleman over here. Oh, you're making Allison run. That's my colleague, Allison. Thank you, Allison.
Kind of to follow up on that, I'm curious what the state is of, I guess I'll call it artificial intelligence, kind of a follow-up to the personality thing. The mechanical aspect, getting the robot to walk and move and stuff like that seems pretty mature. But building a personality, how do you make sure you don't get a Hal or a Cylon or a Terminator or a Marvin? And whoever laughed knows
Oh,
that,
yeah.
some of those are good and some of those are bad. I mean, Marvin, actually, I kind of like
It's a
Marvin,
little-
but
it's a
the
little bit
other
like
three,
Marvin.
I mean, how do you even account for that? And some of the examples I gave thought they were doing the right thing, but
Right.
they really weren't. I mean, you get 3 laws of robotics or what? I'm curious where AI is right now.
Certainly. So whenever you do robotics development, you always have to deal with the Terminator in the room. Every time you're talking about, especially taking a robot and putting it in somebody's home. So we've embraced this idea that we need to talk about this, which is also why you've heard when I talk about the robots, I don't really talk about AI, because AI has this deep history of sort of big AI and HAL, and wonderful people like Marvin Minsky who are being really, really smart and building these really, really large brains, where the brains that we've been putting on these comparatively are actually quite small. Really, when you had big AI, big AI ran on something like Watson, right? Watson is huge, but Watson is also up in the cloud, but Watson's actually quite large. Now, these are super smart, right? They're like a smartphone equivalent, and they can actually do work, but what we're doing is we're being very specific about the type of intelligence that we put on it, which is why we're putting it more in the app-based arena. Like if you want your robot to be able to come find you and say, tell you about, every time somebody tweets, hashtag CE Week, that your robot could come find you and say, hey, this is what's going on. But that's all the robot can do, is the AI that you've given it in that app. Right? So the idea is that you are in control. You can actually go out and say, this is what I want my robot to do, right? The robot isn't in control, so it doesn't have full autonomy. It does have autonomy, and even these right now have line following, and they can kind of make their way around and wayfinding, but we've purposely kept it quite small because we don't need to have a fully baked human intelligence, which is when most people say AI, they're actually not talking about computers. Usually the conversation you're having is about humans and about human-level intelligence, and we're not trying to do human-level intelligence at all. We're actually trying to use them as a conduit for other humans. Now, the question would be, right, just don't take the World Domination app and don't put the World Domination app on it. If you don't put the World Domination app, we'll be okay. Well, actually, I can tell you because we run the App Store, we probably won't put a World Domination app. But that's the idea. You should be able to pick and choose. So we have time for one more question. I have to answer it quick.
I was going to ask something else, but with the empathic situations, can you imagine Jimmy or any of his descendants in something like for conflict, whether you're talking about Congress, heaven forbid, or anything else that involves conflict and empathy or empathic intervention?
So one of the things that has come out with working with USC is very much that. So they're making robots that are social, and if you make robots that are social, they also then have emotions. and they display emotions. And when you start working in the realm of that, which is why we went to USC, we went to the scientists to do it, it's very tricky. It's very important, so I think you have to be very aware of what you're doing. And the work that they're doing on that is actually working with people to kind of use it to almost as a psychiatrist or using it as a therapist, that a lot of people have actually using bots as that. So I think there's the beginnings of it, but usually they're mainly just a proxy. They're a proxy for other human beings, because ultimately these things, these robots, are simply extensions of our own humanity. That we imbue all of our technology with our values, our sense of who we are, what our dreams for the future are, and that's really what these robots sort of represent, and especially for me. For me, Jimmy is the sort of extension of this sort of dream of what we can do with 21st century robots. Listen, I want to thank you all for sitting. Those were great questions. You guys have a great CE week. Please enjoy all the other panels, and keep an eye out for Jimmy. Thank you.